Hey guys, it's Dawn, and today I want to talk about Gardens of the Moon, the first book in Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. So since discovering AuthorTube and BookTube, it's been now, I think 3 years ago. Where does time go? One of the things that I have wanted to work on as an aspiring fantasy writer is to better familiarize myself with my genre, specifically the adult fantasy genre. An endeavor I started last year was getting into the Stormlight archive by Sanderson, and I ended up falling in love with the series, reading all 4 of the books that are currently out, and I am looking forward to the 5th one. However, there is another series that I kept hearing being mentioned on BookTube, and that was Malazan Book of the Fallen, of course. And it was strange to me even before I picked it up or showed any real interest in it, at the library or when I actually eventually got my copy at the thrift store, is I heard both the people that love it and the people that don't love it basically say the same points about it. That it's an incredibly difficult book to read. It's very chewy, and the author sort of drops you in and doesn't explain anything to you. So just on its face, it was interesting to me that these 2 different groups of people could say the same things about this book, and for the people on the negative side, those were things that didn't work for them. For the people on the positive side, they saw those as strengths of the book. So that kind of piqued my interest more and more, but I was still kind of dragging my feet about it because I was truthfully pretty intimidated about the idea of diving into this massive and complex and difficult series. So what finally pushed me over the edge was one of my favorite BookTube channels, Mike's Book Reviews, decided to host kind of a read along of the entire series. So this past January, we were going to be, or his viewers were going to be reading the first book, Gardens of the Moon. So I thought, you know what, I like this channel. It might be fun to do a read along. I'm going to dive in finally. It also just so happened that I think like 2 or 3 months before January started, I had managed to find a copy of the first book at my local thrift store for a couple bucks. So I was prepared. I had a copy. I wasn't worried about, it becoming overdue at the library. Maybe somebody else put a hold on it or whatever. So I had my copy and I no longer had any excuses. And let me just tell you, for the first 100-ish pages of this book, I genuinely thought it was going to end up being a 1-star or a 2-star read, or possibly even a DNF. So 100% of people's criticisms and complaints about this book are true. It is difficult. Nothing is explained. You are very, very confused at the reader, and Steven Erikson makes no visible attempt as the author to try to guide you through the story. When you're coming off of somebody else's writing, such as Sanderson, who has a much more accessible approach to their writing, it is very disconcerting to jump into Steven Erikson. At one point during this time, I got a bit discouraged and decided to look up spoiler-free reviews on Goodreads and just see what people were saying. And I saw a lot of folks saying that you have to get past like the first 100, 150 pages and then things get better. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to stick with it until then and just see what happens. And now in retrospect, I can say that I'm really, really grateful that I did. So Gardens of the Moon is unlike any other epic fantasy I have ever read. I can only describe it as being dropped into a world that you're completely unfamiliar with, and you're just an observer that nobody takes the time to try to show around or explain things to, and you're just sort of tagging along with these different groups of protagonists and literally just watching things happen. And that's it. You're just observing these people and nothing's really being explained to you. The author is not holding your hand or spoon feeding you world building or background or history or lore, any of those things. You're just supposed to pick it up from context. And at first that can be incredibly frustrating because I think in general, at least what I've observed in the reading that I have done, authors tend to try to give readers some little pieces to pick up on so they're not completely lost. So to go into this story that was completely at the opposite end of the spectrum and just feel lost and abandoned as a reader was very overwhelming, to say the least. But in the end, I think I really appreciated Erikson's approach, both as a reader and as an aspiring author, because I realized it was basically him saying to me that he trusted in my own intelligence enough for me to be able to put it together myself and not need to be guided. And that was I guess it was a challenging thing, but it was a welcome challenge in the end. Like, you sort of patted yourself on the back every time you made a connection because you had to work to make that connection. It wasn't just given to you, and so it was a rewarding experience, even though it was incredibly difficult. So, just from the side of being an author, it made me kind of reflect on my own craft and think, how do I want to approach my readers? How much do I want to give them? Do I want it to be a very accessible style that is open to a lot more people? Or do I want to kind of lean more towards an Erikson type style where I'm just presenting the story as it is and letting the readers draw their own conclusions and kind of make the connections themselves? The reality is that most books and most writing styles kind of fall in the middle of this spectrum. Like, I don't think, even technically speaking, Erikson is the exact end of the difficult spectrum. There's probably writing styles that are even more difficult than his. And then I wouldn't say that Brandon Sanderson is easy per se. But yeah, I think most authors and most styles sort of fall somewhere in the middle where, yes, they are trying to tell their readers something so it's a little easier for them, but they also are trying to give them a chance to make discoveries and connections on their own and thus feel more close and more invested in the story because they have had to sort of put forth emotional labor to understand what was going on. I think especially in adult fantasy, where you're kind of trying to challenge your readers a bit more than, say, middle grade or young adult, which have their different challenges that are age appropriate, I think it is kind of fun to experiment with this style and demand more from your readers because, they're at an age or they're at a point in like their mental and emotional development that they are more able to do that. And I think, frankly, that an exploration of this approach to storytelling would actually really benefit young adult fantasy. I have noticed that a lot of the commercially successful young adult fantasy just over the last few years is pretty easy to read. And it's not that I don't think it's okay to have fluffy things to read every once in a while. I think that's totally cool to mix in. But I think it is important to challenge readers, especially young readers. They're developing their minds and they're developing their worldviews. And to just spoon feed them really, really, really approachable things instead of, making them work a little bit as readers and develop those skills, I think is detrimental in the long run. So I would love to see, something Steven Erikson-esque in the young adult world. Obviously not quite this difficult because this is geared towards adults. But yeah, I think it could be a beneficial thing for young people to read something like this. Which kind of brings me to another thought I was having just about the writing craft in general. We here on AuthorTube at least, and I'm sure it's the same in like the blogging world and the Twitter world, but this is the community I'm more familiar with. We make our advice videos and we try to present things as if, there's a right and a wrong way to do things within the writing craft. But this really got me thinking about how there's a million right ways to do something, and all it really depends on is the story you're telling specifically, and then what you're trying to get across through that story. So I'm not here to say that objectively Steven Erikson's approach is better than Brandon Sanderson's. I know I keep bringing him up, but people always call his prose very approachable, so I think it's a good contrast. I don't think one is better or worse than the other because they serve different purposes. I think that when Brandon Sanderson writes, for example, the Stormlight Archive, he's trying to elicit certain emotions from the readers. And that is best done in the way that he has written his books. You know, he's written them in a very approachable way where he really delves into the characters' feelings and their backgrounds. And he's very, very heavy on the world building and explaining all that in detail. Whereas Steven Erikson's purpose is totally different as a writer, and so his approach is effective for what he's trying to do. Obviously, I've only read the first book in Malazan, Book of the Fallen, but to me, one of the huge themes that were touched on was just sort of normal people being caught up in bigger things, you know? So that's really applicable to a lot of us, where we're just trying to live our lives and do the best we can. And sometimes we have moments of reflection of, is this actually what I want to be doing? Do I feel moral doing this? And all those sort of difficult conversations. So Steven Erikson's approach, which is very much kind of as an observer, you're not too far into the character's thoughts, is very interesting because you're just observing these characters go through that kind of thought process. Whereas once again, going to Brandon Sanderson, you are very heavily within the character's head and emotions and experiencing those things with them. So it's interesting to me that in both of these different stories, you know, one that's very emotionally driven and you're very in the characters' heads, and one that's very hands off and you're just sort of observing, I had emotional reactions to both of them, which to me is an indication that both writers are effective in getting their points across. So there's not one right way to do anything. There's not one writer you should be modeling your own personal writing after. You know, as you're exploring, like I am right now, as you're exploring all these different, you know, popular works in fantasy and lesser known works and maybe indie works and whatever, you're not trying to mimic one specific person. You're trying to kind of taste a lot of different things and see what things make sense to you and make you feel closer to your own style and what you were trying to get across to the readers. So as for me, what I am taking away from Steven Erikson is that you can do a lot with a little. And by that, I mean, you don't have to get into all the nitty-gritty of character reactions or a specific explanation behind, you know, a historical event or a current event, you know, influenced by history or whatever. Sometimes you can just allow the readers to be in the moment and experience the moment rather than kind of burdening their brain with extra details. Now, there's a time and place for the opposite, but I think too much in my own writing as I've been developing it, I lean into, oh, I need to explain everything. I don't want the readers to be lost, yada, 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 where sometimes it's okay to let them be lost for a little bit as long as you're leaving enough breadcrumbs to make them want to keep going. So yeah, I'm not sure how coherent all of that was. I just came away from finishing Gardens of the Moon just really thoughtful and introspective. And I just wanted to kind of get some of those thoughts out into the world. And if nobody finds this useful, that's fine. This will kind of be just a video diary for me, just that I can look back on and reflect on. But if you do watch this, I hope it was useful. If you've read Gardens of the Moon, I'd like to hear some of your thoughts about Steven Erikson's style and how you think it's effective getting across what he was trying to do, or maybe you're in the opposite camp and you don't think he was effective. I'm curious to hear why you think that. So anyways, thank you for watching this rambly video about this book I just finished reading a few days ago. If you want to see more similar content on my channel, I'm kind of trying to do some video essays this year on books that impact me. I also kind of want to do some writing vlogs as I have time. I do find, or at least I had found in the last couple of years, that writing vlogs can be disruptive to my writing routine and my writing craft. So I don't do them frequently, but I do want to do some in the future. And I do want to give kind of general writing dates as they come. I think for now, my plan is to do them quarterly, you know, just kind of give quarterly goals. And then at the end of the quarter, wrap up and talk about how I did and how I'm feeling about it. But yeah, if any of that content interests you, feel free to subscribe and hang around and chat with me. I'm pretty approachable, I think. Sometimes I'm a little scatterbrained, so I don't always get to comments quickly, but I will try to, and I am definitely happy to talk to anyone who is interested to gab about these topics I'm interested in. So, anyways, once again, thanks for watching the video. I hope you have an amazing week, and as always, happy writing. Bye! The night held close as I wandered, my spirit unfooted to either earth or stone, unraveled from tree, undriven by iron nail, but like the night itself, a thing of air stripped of light, so I came upon them, those masons who cut and carved stone in the night, siding by stars and battered hand. What of the sun? Asked I of them. Is not its cloak of revelation the warmth of reason in your shaping? And one among them answered, no soul can withstand the sun's bones of light, and reason dims when darkness falls, so we shape barrows in the night for you and your kin. Forgive my interruption then, said I. The dead never interrupt, said the mason, they but arrive.